start with the mention of a halachic discussion in regard to the haftarah of last week. Last week was Rosh Chodesh, and it was also one of the Gimel de Pernusa. The haftarah, what haftarah is supposed to be read, is a very big machlokes in the Paiskim. Here in this shul, we read the regular haftarah, and we didn't consider the Shabbos Rosh Chodesh aspect. And this is a very important question, why that is so. Because in the Shiva de Nechemta, the 7 weeks which follow after Tisha B'Av until Rosh Hashanah, if Rosh Chodesh falls out, then we push away the Shiva de Nechemta in favor of the Haftarah for Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. And the answer to this question, I believe, is according to those that explain what is the Haftarah that we preferred. It has to do with Shmiya, the idea of listening. That's where the Haftarah starts. And this idea of Shmiya is very central in the 3 weeks and in Tisha B'Av, as we're going to see as we proceed. There are many things which we are aware of, understand, but we don't fully internalize. The subject which I would like to discuss today is the Marmar Chazal, which was mentioned many times today, that the reason that the Beis Hamikdash Harishon was destroyed was because of the Gimel Averos Chamuros, the 3 cardinal sins, and at the same time it was destroyed because of Bittul Torah, or like Bircha B'Torah Tchila. And the question is, obviously, how do these two things come together? And what does it have to do with the idea of Shmiya, this is what I would like to explain. I'm going to explain this, the shittas of many different mefarshim. First, I was in Lakewood, I had a close kesher with the Mashgiach Reb Nosson Bachweigel, and he used to explain the idea of Shlo Bircha B'Torah Tchila with a very simple words. You say 4 words, Abgerissen von der Eibishter. That was, whoever understands Yiddish, that was, they didn't have a problem with learning Torah. They had a problem with the Torah being the conduit to their relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They felt that Torah in its own can stand and sustain them, and they didn't see that this is how we have our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We are fortunate today that we have a very famous saying which we say, Kutshu Brichu B'Yisrael V'Raisachadu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Torah, and Klal Yisrael is one. It's not possible to have a connection of 2 out of the 3 without there being the 3rd one there. No matter how you work it out, this threesome goes together. But it seems there was a time that they were able to understand and appreciate the godless of the Torah, but it didn't bring them to their relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which the Torah is supposed to do. Now, okay, but that's because it's going to bring them back. That's the way. There's a stepping stone. That if a person, the Oisi Azvu means Kima Mitzvahs, that's what it means in that Ma'amar Chazal. But the idea, the connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and how we and HaKadosh Baruch Hu are one, that is via the Torah. And when we see the Torah as something external to the relationship that we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then we have missed the point of the Torah and missed the point of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, this idea of Shlo Birchu B'Torah Tchila has many explanations, and one of them, the Stipler says, there are many discussions in the Sifrei Drush and in the Sifrei Halacha as to the purpose of Birchas HaTorah. The Stipler goes with the Mahalach that Birchas HaTorah is a Birchas Hanenin. just like before you eat an apple, you partake of something which gives you pleasure, you make a bracha. Limud HaTorah is supposed to be something that gives you pleasure. And a person who has pleasure, you have to make a bracha before you get that pleasure. So Birchas HaTorah is a obligation of a Birchas HaNenin. And that which they were low, Birch HaTorah Tchila, was because they felt that Limud HaTorah was an obligation that they have. They didn't see the honor, the pleasure, which can be derived from Limud HaTorah, though they did everything that they had to do, but they were missing this aspect of the pleasure of Limud HaTorah. This aspect of Limud HaTorah is something that in the annals of the world of yeshiva goes down as the Hakdama to the Iglei Tal. The Iglei Tal was known as the Avnei Nezer. He wrote a sefer on Hilchos Shabbos called the Iglei Tal. The Iglei Tal is a basic sefer. There's no anybody who does anything in the Lamates Malachos that is not familiar with the sefer of the Iglei Tal. The Iglei Tal, just to have an understanding of what the sefer is, the Iglei Tal said he in his life saw Chilul Shabbos twice. And he said, if I would have seen Chilul Shabbos a third time, I wouldn't have been able to write the sefer. Because he internalized that which he saw to the extent, how could I, who saw Chilul Shabbos, write such an important sefer on Shabbos? There was a disconnect. There would be a disconnect between him and the sefer, and he wouldn't be able to write the sefer. In this Hakdama, he discusses Averis that people do, and a concept of tshuva through Limud HaTorah. Now, this idea of tshuva through Limud HaTorah, I would like to go to a forerunner to the Avnei Nezer, the Noda B'Yehuda, who was the Paisik Hador 200 years before the Avnei Nezer. He writes in a tshuva about a person he did a very great sin, one of the Gimel Averis Chamurais, and he had to do tshuva. And the Mekubalim are full of all kinds of Sigufim, Yisurim, that a person is supposed to do when he does an Avera. Even in Shulchan Aruch discusses what a person is supposed to do. The Noda B'Yehuda is from the trailblazers in this idea. Nowadays, that's not the way that we should do tshuva. We should sit and learn. And he goes to explain this person, though he did these great Averas, you want to have tshuva, a person has to have tshuva, has to sit and learn, and by sitting and learning, you will accomplish wiping out that Avera that you have done. Now, I'm not explaining all of these things in their totality, but I would just like to share with you Rabbi Yisrael Salanter writes in the Mechtovim. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who is the father of the Musar movement, he discusses when a person does tshuva, so people have, they have a Yetzer Hara. Whatever it is, they speak Lashon Hara. So how am I going to get myself to stop speaking Lashon Hara? So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter says, learn the halachas of the Avera that you did. A person has the taiva of stealing, learn Hilchas Gezela. A person has the taiva of eating treif, learn Machalas Asuris. Whatever it is that you have a taiva for that aspect, if a person will learn Torah, and especially if he learns Torah that has to do with that aspect, that will take off the Yetzer Hara that he has for that Avera. Now, this is not the typical understanding of Barasi Yetzer Hara, Barasa Torah Tavlin. Barasi Yetzer Hara, Barasa Torah Tavlin means that a person who learns Torah will not have any connection to that thing at all. Here we're speaking about a person who has already been involved in that Avera, and this is part of the tshuva to get a person out of it. But this idea that a person, even from the worst of sins, if a person learns Torah, and this is a Tanai, has to learn Torah with a Geshmak, it has to be enjoyable to him. He has to benefit from it physically. When a person benefits from Torah physically, that is something which can wipe out an Avera. I'd just like to share with you a story that happened when I was in yeshiva many years ago, where Shiva was very disturbed by a certain question in the Gemara for maybe 2 weeks. And finally, after 2 weeks, he came up with a teretz to the kasha. And he said, do you know what this teretz is worth? And I thought he was going to say, $1 million, what is it? He says, it's worth having my neshama come from the olam hanitzchi to be here in this world for 70 miserable years, just to be machadish that chiddush in Torah. And this is a fascinating idea of understanding that he enjoyed what he learned. He enjoyed what he learned to the point that he said it's worth it to give up the olam hanitzchi, to come down to this world, which is full of all not good things, to have to suffer here just to eke out this one svara. So this is an idea of what does it mean to have limud Torah that brings you to a state that it can wipe away an avera. That's the okay. There's a story told, a similar story told. Rav Gifter, who I had the privilege of knowing personally, Rav Gifter, when I knew him, there were 2 bachrim in the yeshiva that were zeicha to take a walk with him twice a week. He would take a walk, he had a constitutional, he would take a walk for 20 minutes every day. And there were 2 bachrim, one who lives here in Eretz Yisrael today, who they had the schus of accompanying him on his walk. And it was well known that in those walks there were unbelievable divrei Torah that were discussed. Rav Gifter writes that when he was a bacher in Telz, he had the schus to be the bacher that walked with the Rosh Yeshiva Rav Yitzchak Bloch. And he said there, the condition of being the walker with the Rosh Yeshiva was you were not allowed to say anything. It was a silent walk unless the Rosh Yeshiva said something to you. And he says, over in his story, he says that I was walking with Rav Yitzchak Bloch, and the subject of gaining hana from limud Torah was what we were discussing, and I discussed with him this idea that it could very well be that having enjoyment from limud Torah is the way that we can actually eradicate sin in our lives. And Rav Yitzchak Bloch was very happy with that, which I said, and Rav Gifter goes on to explain where he found the sources for all of this thought himself afterwards. I would just like to perhaps give a bit of an explanation of how this could be. Where is the connection between limud Torah and getting geschmack out of your learning and eradicating sin? People who sin, the reason why they sin is because in their mind's eye they see that they are going to gain benefit from it. And therefore, if I do this, I'm going to receive whatever your Yetzer Hara could dream up as the reward, makes it worthwhile to do the sin. Okay? After a person does the sin, and reality sets in, and he realizes what he did, then he has remorse. And this is where the place for tshuva is to fit in. However, a person can hijack the system. If a person has hana from something ruchni, that hana that he has supersedes any hana that from anything you can have from a physical pleasure, and therefore the Yetzer Hara doesn't have anything to say to him. And I'll just use this as an example. There are people that I used to have a shaykhis to in Yerushalayim that were very big machnise orchim, balei tzedakah, and you would see the joy of their existence. When they would have a guest come to eat a meal by them, you would see how they were physically elated. They were living on a different plane. They were infused with the mitzvah, and they weren't willing to sell it for anything. This is a person who is involved in ruchnius, and he has this stamina to tell the Yetzer Hara no. We and I'm just going to say over what the Bali Musar say. The Yetzer Hara is called in Chazal the Melech Zoken V'Ksil. That's a very strange title. And it means that he is a king, and he's old, but he is foolish. And the way to beat off the Yetzer Hara usually is with the word, which is, I was brought up with mañana. Anybody who knows what that means tomorrow. You have a Yetzer Hara, and your Yetzer Hara, a head-on attack with the Yetzer Hara, you probably will not have the stamina to win the fight. What you do is you push off the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara says, go to shul late. Tomorrow I'll go late. Tomorrow is an easier day. I have less things on my schedule. I'll work it out tomorrow to come late. But today I'm going to come on time. Whatever it is, when the person has the Yetzer Hara attacking him, usually if a person pushes off the Yetzer Hara, you could push it off until the Yetzer Hara shrinks in size, and you can deal with this. This idea, if I'm not mistaken, the earliest source for this is the Gemara in Yuma that says a person has the Yetzer Hara, Yilbash Charim v'yelech l'makom she'einu makira, and you should do the chet there. Don't tell the Yetzer Hara you're not going to do the chet. They'll say, okay, I'm going to go to Tel Aviv, I'm going to go to Beersheva, I'm going to go here and go there and do the chet there. And by the time you get there, you could already work on some other way to get rid of the Yetzer Hara, and you shouldn't have to do the Aveira. This is all part of this idea that if a person will have Hana, will appreciate the Torah that he has, then the Yetzer Hara will not come about and bother him. Another aspect is, and this is, I believe, the most important thing, a person who is busy will not have a Yetzer Hara. People who are busy are consumed. Rav Moshe Feinstein writes in a tshuva, it's a fascinating tshuva, he has a tshuva, halacha l'maisa, about if a person is allowed to go on the subway. And his subject is that a person goes on the subway, he's bound to be forced to touch people, bump into people, see people in all different kinds of situations, which is not befitting for a person who's a shomer Torah mitzvahs. And Rav Moshe writes in the tshuva, it's 100% mutter. All you have to do is think and learning. Because a person who is consumed with his ruchnius, the environment which he finds himself in will not affect him. This is a fascinating idea, and even though I just like to say over a story about Rabbi Avrohom Wasserman, which in a certain sense contradicts this, I believe that the two are not a contradiction. Rabbi Avrohom Wasserman came to America in the 30s, and he was driving through Manhattan, and he stopped learning. He was sitting in the car learning, and he stopped and he asked the driver, "Where are we?" And the driver said, "We're on 42nd Street." So anybody who knows what 42nd Street understands that this is not a place where Rabbi Avrohom Wasserman should be or would want to be. And he felt that it was affecting his Avodas Hashem. Just being there, not connected at all. This idea of just being there, not connected at all, I'd like to share with you a statement from, I would say, in the last, till his lifter maybe 7 or 8 years ago. There was a Jew, his name was Motcha Friedlander, who he was the Rosh Vara Mishmeres Stam of the Eila Charedis and of the World Organization, and he was a major player in all of Hilchos Stam. And whatever he said, he was the gold standard that people would go by. He made the following statement. A person, this was the question that he had. A person had a pair of tefillin that were written some 40 years ago. They were in good condition, but they needed to be touched up a little bit to make them last for another 40 years. He could spend money on touching them up, or maybe he should just buy already another pair of tefillin. This is the question that Motcha Friedlander was asked. And Rabbi Avrohom's answer was something which is nogea to every single person here. I don't know if all of you will accept that which he said literally, but conceptually we all understand it. He said, I rather wear a pair of tefillin that was written before the internet was invented than a pair of tefillin that were written after the internet was connected by a person who lives in Zimbabwe that never heard of the internet. But the fact that there's the internet in the world, which brings about so much decadence, has to have a ripple effect on everybody there. So even to have a pair of tefillin that were written by some tzaddik in a faraway place that has no connection at all to the internet is a lesser standard than a pair of tefillin that had to be repaired from a mere 40 years ago. Now this statement to me is a fascinating golden rule. Now I would just like to share with you where this is nogea to us in our lives. I'll just use this as an example. I say over many times, there are people who use Schottenstein Gemaras, Mesifta Gemaras, Lublin Gemaras. There's all these different kinds of Gemaras that people use, and they have a purpose, and they should be used for that purpose. But it doesn't come to a person who sat and suffered and drove himself crazy to understand a lot of Gemara. All of those simple, seamless explanations that put things in place and make your life easier don't compare to the hard work that a person has to do to accomplish something. And I would like to explain this because this is relevant in many areas of our service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I had to make a cabinet, and I went to the shop of a nagar, of a carpenter. And I look at his shop, and I say, with what are you a carpenter? You give me these machines, I could make the cupboard exactly the same. There's nothing here that shows skill. Okay, when I was a youngster, I went to a carpentry class, and the person who gave the class understood a piece of wood. You would show him a piece of wood, he would be able to tell you if it will warp, where it will warp, how it will warp, what kind of pressure it could take, how to build it, you know what I'm talking about? And today's carpenter has nothing to do with being a carpenter. He has to do with how to press buttons on a machine. I need an angle like this, you do it like that. It has nothing to do with really understanding the work that goes into creating a fine object. Now the question arises, and this is a fascinating question. If I could make a piece of furniture through being a real carpenter, or I can go to the carpenter's office and press all the buttons and have a machine come out, which piece of furniture will be a better piece of furniture? Anybody who understands quality will understand that nothing can compare to the carpenter, whatever field, irrelevant what field you're talking about, the person who really understands and puts together the pieces and makes the edifice that we're talking about. All of those computers that can make the angles better and sharper and you don't have to sand it down afterwards, don't compare to the sanded down piece by the professional carpenter. What I just said right now, I would like to explain something very simple. I have a friend of mine who we were friends. He lives in America already for 20 years. We were friends from like 40 years ago to 20 years ago. We were very good friends. And his father-in-law was a public schools teacher in the New York school system. And on Sunday, his father-in-law used to give a shir l'halacha for Balabatim. He would pick a topic and make a chabura on that topic, and he would give this over to the Balabatim. When the, I forgot what it's called, the Bar Ilan or the Eitzer HaChachma, one of these Torah, what I call them Torah Anytime devices came around, he was afraid he's going to be put out of business. The Balbas knows beforehand what the subject is going to be. The guy is going to research the subject, and he's going to beat him at his own game. And what he found was that there were many of the Balabatim who came to the shir that actually had these devices. Nothing. Exactly. They weren't able to do anything with them. Because Chazal say, Kishem she'ein uman b'li kelim, kach ein kelim b'li uman. In order to have excellence come forth, you have to have a craftsman who has the tools that are necessary. To have one without the other doesn't help. A person who knows be'erech what he's doing, maybe they can help. But a person who doesn't have the basic understanding of what's going on, it cannot help him that he should get to where he needs to go. So, in short, I believe this is the unbelievable important idea that we have to understand how is Limud HaTorah central to us in our Avodas Hashem. The first thing we have to understand is what the Ran says, B'Shem Rabbeinu Yoina, Shelo Birchu B'Torah Tchila, that they didn't feel the connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or they didn't feel the importance of Limud HaTorah as a mitzvah in its own right. I just recently had a discussion with somebody, and I believe this is a fascinating idea. The Gemara in Kedushin discusses what's more important, Lilmoid or Lasos, which is more important. And the Gemara's conclusion is learning is more important than doing, because it's Lilmoid al Manas Lasos, which seems to contradict itself. It says that the reason why learning is more important than doing is because learning brings to doing. This is a problem how to even read such a Gemara. I would like to explain this Gemara, and I believe that with this we'll have a better understanding of Torah and how it connects us to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and even how it connects us to ourselves. Limud HaTorah has two aspects to it. There's a person who wants to know how to daven, so you take out an Orach Chaim, you take out a Gemara Brachos. It depends how far back you want to research the subject, and you will know how to daven. A person who is not a kohen, and he is going to learn about the halachos of Kabbalas Hadam in the Beis Hamikdash. What is he doing? So on a simple level, you'll say it can become part of the Lishkas HaGazis, the Sanhedrin, and when there will be a Shaila, then he will be able to answer the question. But we all understand that the mitzvah of Limud HaTorah has in it a totally different aspect too. There's the idea of Limud HaTorah for the sake of Limud HaTorah. I'm learning Torah because this is our connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and in that there's no difference whether you're learning Masechtas Kelim or Masechtas Brachos. It has nothing to do with execution of the halacha. You're learning what is the Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this idea of learning what is the Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's Lilmod al Manas Lilmoid, but that has an aspect of it al Manas Lasos. What does it mean that it has an aspect al Manas Lasos? I'd like to share with you a statement that I heard from our Rosh Yeshiva once. He said, this svara is correct ad halacha l'maisa. Now we were learning at that time Kachim, and I wasn't exactly sure what does it mean that this halacha is correct ad halacha l'maisa. We don't have a Beis Hamikdash, we're not shechting korbanos. And he answered with a very important idea. There are thoughts that people have. This is something which the Tanya discusses, Tais discusses, and the Koisha Clover has a truth about this. When people think, do people think in words or in thoughts? And the Koisha Clover, based on a stira and two Taisasin in Shabbos, says it depends at what part of the thought process. A person has an idea, and eventually that idea takes form, and it takes form till the point that he can discuss it in words, and then even after he discusses it in words, he can actually actualize it in an action. But this is the way all thoughts evolve to be actions. Now, a person who has a thought. And I'll just give this example, it's very important. There's such a thing as a person says a Pashup Pshat and he says a Lamdish Pshat. What's the difference between someone saying a Pashup Pshat or a Lamdish Pshat? And I'm going to give the answer to this question in my opinion, and the answer is very great. The difference between them is very great. Pashup Pshat is the way that this can be executed the simplest. The Lamdish Pshat is the way that it can be understood at the highest level. The Lamdish Pshat is closer to the idea at the place where it was born, but it doesn't necessarily have the ability to pan out in reality. The Pashup Pshat is the Pshat that it works down here, and we can somehow see that it's related to that idea that was the mother of this action. Halacha l'maisa, svara that's correct, halacha l'maisa, means I can explain this svara from the root of the thought until how it comes out in the actual doing the act. This is a level of Torah which is called Asukei Shmaitza Liv Dehilchasa, that you can bring it to fruition in the acts that we do. The mitzvah of Limud Torah that it seems to me from all the Mefarshim that was lacking was the connection to the Limud Torah for being connected to the source. The source that we're trying to connect to in Limud Torah is HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Yisrael, who we are and who HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. And the place that we meet is through the Chochmah of the Torah, which was given to us to learn. And if Mitzvah Hashem, we're nischazik in our Limud Torah, that will bring about the Devekas that's necessary to bring about the Geula Shlema B'Meira.